going to wake up. So I wish I could be in person to share this presentation and discuss its contents with you. You know, Zoom and the internet have been quite helpful during COVID, but even before that, you know, in overcoming a kind of belief we had about space and time. You know, as I said, it's 6 a.m. here. So here we are, unthinkable just a decade ago that we could be doing this together. So Martin asked if I could say a little about my history. I did 42 years in the computer industry, and near the end of my career, you know, I was CTO, the chief technology officer for one company, and a little bit before that, I was the vice president for another. Of course, those were smaller companies. I retired in 2013, and since then, I've been very active in the local branch of Boston. I assist in the National Society, and in 2014, I joined Adriana Kulias and a few others as an admin for the Facebook group Anthroposophy. And then soon after I joined, she dropped because she had too many other things going on. I kind of felt, no, never mind. I'm just joking about, you know, suddenly being the ferryman on the boat, you know, and he's asked, how can I get out of this job of being the ferryman? And somebody said, just when you get to the shore, jump out first. Anyways, and I did this in a sense out of what I would call a Rosicrucian gesture of trying to be where people are. And this is where much of humanity was moving to social media. And it felt like bringing anthroposophy to that was the right thing to do. And you'll hear as I go through this talk more about that. But during this retirement period, I started taking deep questions to sleep. And some of you are probably familiar with this technique that, you know, when you take things as questions into sleep and then you listen in the morning, and it did happen. There were mornings I woke up and these inspirations from the morning led to the founding of Mistech. And one of those inspirations in the morning was that I heard Ahriman is fed by fear. And at that time, I had been going around doing lectures where I used fear, I hate to admit. I knew that the more fearful it was, the more people would come up afterwards and say, that was a great lecture. Thanks for telling us that. So I even called it my Alfred Hitchcock lecture series because I was using fear, and I changed all of that. In fact, I stopped doing lectures for about 7 years and then started up again when Mistech got going. And one of the items that has been present in the background, but I haven't fully understood yet, is something that came to me and then I found in Steiner, where he referred to a task for our time, and it needs to be completed well before the year 8000, is the interpenetration of the moral and the mechanical. And wow, I thought, that's fascinating. How do you do that? So Mystech intends to play a role in how technology will affect and be part of human evolution. Now, as I go through my presentation today, I'm sure some of you will be asking, why worry about something that's so far off? I'll be talking about things out in the year, in the sixth millennium and in the seventh and the eighth millennium. And I might even be looking at the next planetary condition. Some people might call it the next solar system after ours. So, and people will say, come on, let's just worry about the here and now. Why worry about something so far off? Well, it is part of our evolution to no longer just receive, but now to become responsible, creative beings. In fact, we're on our way to become the 10th hierarchy. Within each of us is a longing to be creative. We are on our way. And what does it mean to become the 10th hierarchy? One might conclude that we seem to be heading in the wrong direction. So tonight we'll answer, how does evolution take place? How do we, well, that's perhaps a goal too far, but we'll try to look at it. And how do we evaluate what is progress? What is moving us in the right direction? How do we assess that? For this, we will be relying on spiritual science and the findings of Rudolf Steiner. So let's get that long-term view I was mentioning. So I'll borrow from occult science. We learn that evolution has long existed with prior planetary conditions. And by planetary condition, I mean something akin to a solar system, but not all of these previous planetary conditions had a sun or even a star, nor did they have elements of the periodic chart. Different conditions prevailed on each of these prior planetary conditions, and on them were beings that went through what could be called their human stage. Interestingly, astrophysics has a branch called metallicity that has postulated there must have been 3 prior solar systems for the elements of the periodic chart to have evolved. We see here the past planetary condition when humans were gifted their bodily members. On old Saturn, we were in a state similar to today's mineral kingdom, only there was no physical at that time. So for old Saturn, we might have been called the mineral kingdom, we today humans. The physical itself has progressed from a warmth state on old Saturn, through old sun, through old moon, and it continues to evolve in our times, coming through from warmth to air to liquid and becoming solid in the earth period. Our physical body was first bequeathed to us as the warmth element upon old Saturn. And we got our etheric body during old sun, our astral body during old moon. And upon earth, we have received our ego. Receiving these is just the first thing. Developing them must follow. On each of these prior planetary conditions, there was a human stage, but of course not like ours, as I was trying to say earlier. So if we look at old Saturn as an example, the beings who are now the archai, so from humans, there's angels, archangels, and then archai. So the archai were upon the human stage. And of course, as I said, we were essentially the mineral kingdom for them. We were in the warmth element. And at that time, they used us to make the equivalent, and I'm stretching the meaning of this, they used us to make their tools and their machines. So the first half of Earth evolution carries the esoteric name Mars. The second half carries the esoteric name Mercury. So the future planetary conditions are, you might say, therefore, called Jupiter, then Venus, and completing all of this, we starting to use, and esotericists do as well, the Latin name for the god of technology, Vulcan. So the next planetary condition, Jupiter, will be followed by two more way out in the distance. Three higher states for humanity. And the Sanskrit words are Manas, Buddhi, and Atman. These will be developed. These are but seeds in us now. While we work, and we can sum upon Manas in this epoch that we're in now, and Steiner, I'll go more into what I mean by epochs. And then in the sixth epoch that follows the one we're in now, we'll be able to work upon Buddhi, and then in the seventh upon Atman. And but these won't come into their own until these future planetary conditions as shown. So Jupiter will be constructed out of what was once within our bodies. This includes our thoughts. Even what we have exhaled from our body will become building blocks for Jupiter. Wow. Imagine that all the earth, water, air, and warmth bodies that you and everyone else have fashioned over multiple lifetimes, all this is united into a new single cosmic globe. That will be, according to Steiner, Jupiter. Thus, since the second half of Earth, we are increasingly preparing for what will be Jupiter and this future. So all of what was given to us, our astral, our etheric, our physical, and so on, will be so worked upon that they may be left behind. Let me repeat that. All of these gifts and that descent, all of that, we will be able to leave it behind. The ego that we have received here on Earth transforms the astral into Manas, transforms the etheric into Buddhi, and lastly, transforms the physical into Atman. You go, you should go. There's a problem here. We will no longer have a physical body. Even by the time of the seventh epoch of Earth evolution, we will no longer have a physical body. So what do we transform then? How do we transform the physical into Atman in the future? Well, like the Archai, who are working on building up their Atman today, we will also complete our work on the physical, or what the physical will be then, under quite different conditions, and even without a physical body as we have it today. It will be something that's all embracing upon Vulcan. So Steiner points out that what began in old Saturn and is the basis to our physical body today, he calls it the phantom body. And this will continue with us throughout these future planetary conditions. So I mentioned epochs, and each of these planetary conditions that you just saw, each of them are composed of 7 epochs. And here in this chart, we see the first 4 epochs of Earth evolution. The first 3 of these 4 epochs recapitulated a prior planetary condition. In these recapitulations, the 4 elements and ethers were added to our constitution as evolution progressed. Cosmic events coincided with each of these, of course. And I might mention that the Atlantean epoch was our first epoch that was fully earthly and not some recapitulation of a prior planetary condition. In the middle of that epoch, the middle of the Atlantean epoch, we stepped out of the watery element onto land for the first time. Before that, we were watery. Before that, we were air beings. Before that, we were fire beings. So once upon the earth element, then sexual procreation could begin. And in the Bible, this is the birth of Seth. So what were we before this? And Steiner says humanity procreated as androgynous beings. Each of our offspring was like a clone of us. And so when it says so-and-so lived for 950 years, this is what was going on, that the offspring were like clones, and they retained a memory as if it were their own in their blood that was the same as their ancestors. Now, the future epochs will mirror and complete the spiritual impulses that were brought into these first three epochs. The current and future two epochs also preview or foreshadow the conditions of the future planetary conditions of Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan. So in our current fifth epoch, those who will be on the human stage of Jupiter are now coming up to be among us, not in the physical, but in our subconsciousness. They come from below, so they have to pass through Ahriman's realm. I hope you know what I mean by Ahriman. And in this, if we look at who was crucified, there were two other beings, one on Christ's left and one on his right. And Lucifer, we can say, was the one on his left, and Ahriman on his right. And whereas Lucifer is the bearer of light, Ahriman would be, we could say, the devil of darkness. So these future humans of Jupiter, as they are amongst us now, have an Ahrimanic coloring to their nature. And we will be to them on Jupiter what the angels are to us today. And perhaps you know, on Jupiter, on the end of Earth evolution, our goal is to make this a planet of love and freedom. And beings on Jupiter will experience, as we experience wisdom in nature, they will experience in their nature love. And so we can say the angels love us today. Our guardian angel will go with us wherever we go, however wrong or right it is. And we must do very similar for these Jupiter humans. And so just as colors arise from the interpenetration of light and dark in our world, I mentioned the interpenetration of the moral and the mechanical. So on Jupiter, this interpenetration of the moral and the mechanical will be experienced by those beings in a way that we can say is analogous to the interpenetration of light and dark to bring us colors on our earthly stage. And only human beings of Earth can fulfill this task. Steiner drew our evolutionary path like this. The lowest point designates when we attained clear day consciousness. In pre-Lemurian times, the human being had a dull clairvoyance. At that time, human beings were closer to God than today. Then they acquired day consciousness in this descent. Human beings will take that consciousness with them in the course of their future evolution, when we again approach God and become clairvoyant again. every point on the descending line corresponds to a point on the ascending line. Each spiritual impulse during this descent has its completion at the appropriate time during the ascent. So here you see in blue the intended path intended by the Elohim, or in Greek, the exousiai. We would have been beings that circled around the earth. But because of Eden, we fell to the black curve. Now we are approaching, and it has already begun, when we, out of freedom, decide our future. Individually, we have the choice to follow the path of Christ or to remain with the physical and thereby experience what Steiner called the second fall. And I have another lecture on this future times that I can send you a link to if you're interested in it, but we can't go with that in this. But this is when our Ahrimanic double will essentially take over our physical body with us or without us in it still. And then this second fall will occur. We do not also have time to really go into what I mean by the Christ. I believe all of you have a good idea, but for those who may not or may have some religious upbringing that you today can't stand the idea of or the concept of Christ, we can substitute my higher I am if you so wish. So once humanity accepted, once upon a time, humanity accepted all that God gave us, and we desired nothing more. That was the gesture and era of Abel. It is and has been over. The time of Cain is upon us. We are becoming the offspring of Hiram Abiff, who was the builder of the temple, Solomon's temple, the temple that is man. When we look at the possible pictures of the future, we feel a dread in our souls about putting humans, as we are currently constituted, in charge of creation. We know all too well how easily we ourselves can give in to temptations, how weak we are in our own moral fortitude. Can we really trust, when we look at politics and wars and so on today, our own fellow human beings? Maybe we should go back to a simpler lifestyle, a lifestyle before technology. If we did, according to Steiner, we would be giving up our potential to become the 10th hierarchy. Rather than trying to avoid technology's frightful future, we should seek for the counterbalances and the soul strengthening that allows us to get through the coming difficult periods. So, is it possible to evolve with technology in a healthy and meaningful way? What could the role be, the cosmic role for technology in our human and in our earthly evolution? To answer this, Steiner gave us spiritual science. Obviously, evolution is a progression, and we talked some about this. I will now also go back to, as you see, old Saturn, old sun, old moon here. In that first solar system, there was only warmth, as I said. In the second, this warmth continues, but out of it also came fire and then smoke or air and light. Then all these continue into the next old moon, where a new element, water, and a new ether, the chemical or tone or number ether, was added. And in our solar system, the solid, the earth, was added along with a new ether, the life ether. We can ask, will this continue on Jupiter? And the answer is yes, it will continue out through all of them until there are 7 ethers and 7 elements. What's real is not matter, but the elementals that we would say in our terminology are behind what our physical senses perceive. Elementals, as Steiner would call them. When creative beings create, beings are created, elemental beings. What we experience of the world is called Maya, illusion. We see only surfaces. We can say that these elemental beings, of the ethers are luciferic, and they're Ahrimanic in the elements. But I want you to be careful here. Really, we should be putting them where I have them, because it wasn't until Old Moon was beginning that the Godhead asked some of the dynamis to become gods of hindrance. Now, dynamis are the beings directly above the exousiai, or in the Bible, the Elohim. And so they have brought into their realm of being gods of hindrances some of the other beings. So the point of this is, if we can work upon the elementals, this could give us a potential counterbalance to what we face. So I want to go a little deeper into this, and we'll look at the combustion engine and the vacuum. And credit is given to a guy named Thomas Savery in 1698. He was a British, and he invented the combustion engine to pump water out of the coal mines. 33 years earlier, a Robert Boyle had cruelly demonstrated that an animal would die inside a sealed chamber when his air pump sucked the air out of it. That's interesting. I'm sorry, but it's horribly cruel what he did. But what we have to realize back then is, at that time, people did not know about the gases and oxygen and nitrogen and so on. The air at that time was still thought to be something spiritual. You could not convince people that, I can do this, that there's anything there except spirit. So Steiner describes the steam engine as Ahriman's triumph over Jehovah. The destiny of the physical realm, according to Steiner, was at that moment given over to Ahriman. Before this invention, the creative Elohim, known as Yahweh or Jehovah, had reigned over the elements of fire, air, and water. Replacing Jehovah with Ahriman must have been foreseen by beings higher than the Elohim. Giving Ahriman rulership of the destiny of the physical must mean that our future goal is not with the physical. Let's remind ourselves that we are cosmic beings on the earth for the right conditions for this part of our evolution. Soon, we are to be tested for our spiritual mettle by the incarnation of Ahriman in the flesh. I believe this will happen when Raphael, not Michael, is the time spirit, or around the year 2233. We heard from Genesis, and he breathed into his nostrils, and Adam became a living soul. Here are Steiner's words about this, and he describes it. And I want you to listen for the word we as creative beings. So here's Steiner's words. We drive Yahweh away when we create space where the air is rarefied. That is, such as by the action of the piston. When we build a steam or combustion engine, we provide the opportunity for Ahriman to establish himself as a demonic being, even in the physical. It is we as so this is me now. It is we as creative beings who do this. And here I reached quite an enlightenment. Thank you for my mornings. That Paul Emerson, if some of you know of his work, was a great pioneer, but he didn't get one thing here. He thought of electricity as evil. And to a certain extent, this was correct. But it is we, by our wrong concept of electricity, we, in the realm of where concepts are, have placed a different being in front of the real being of electricity. We have the wrong concept, and therefore we allow Ahrimanic beings to act as demonic beings within electricity. And even this can be redeemed. As sons of gods, we were destined to become creative beings. Since the 15th century, we have become creators. Like the Exusii, we create in our likeness. What are we most conscious of? Our dead thinking, thus artificial intelligence. With our use of vacuums and electricity, we populate modern devices with demonic elementals who must have an Ahrimanic character. Just as we have been transformers of the lifeless, so shall we be the transformers of the living. We must start this transformation sequence with the elementals. There is a danger today that these elementals will align with Lucifer or with Ahriman, as you saw in that chart, if humans do not do this transformation for them. Another danger today is that we will be overwhelmed ourselves by these demonic elementals of our own creation. So we should ask, how do we transform elementals? And it's just been amazing timing of things. A Norwegian anthroposophist, Are Thoresen, has been on tour here in the United States speaking about this. And this comes out of both his anthroposophy and his own experiences that he had during COVID, while sick with COVID. We as creative beings must bring the Christ or Christ consciousness into the midst of elementals. Only Christ in us can transform here. Without the Christ, we merely translocate. We move a disease or an elemental from where we are healing to somewhere else. It is necessary for us to learn how to transform, and this statue shows us how to do it. If we look on our left, and so if you are standing there as the representative of man, it is on the right, we see how Lucifer and Ahriman act today together. And what we need to do is act like the representative of man, where we, in our gesture, in our will, as expressed in our hands, separate the two. You can even do this gesture with your hands. Look at the hands of the representative of man. And you can see this separating. You can do that. What you do is when you are able to perceive, and there's techniques to learn how to do this, perceive the elemental in even your smartphone, you can use this technique to separate Lucifer and Ahriman in their midst by finding the center and bringing the Christ into that. So you do this 3 times, and with each time you do it, you say something like, with Christ's love, or Christ in you, and then feel the cosmos responding with, and may he fill thy spirit. Demonizing is Christianizing. We do this not only to the elementals, but more importantly, to our processes of research and development. Yes, by doing so, we can make technology that does not destroy. Here, Steiner called for the lab bench to become the altar. And this is a goal of Mystech. We cannot do this Christianization on people. They must be left free unless they seek it for true healing. So many people now expect transhumanism to dominate existence. Will humans become augmented? Will humans exist only in virtual reality? Is this where we are to be creative? It is claimed that such engineered people will be so different from us, so much more intelligent, that we would classify them as a new superior species. And this is known as the post-human. In 2020, a great, well-known transhumanist, Nick Bostrom, wrote Letter from Utopia, where he claimed post-humanity would usher in a techno-utopian paradise marked by wonders, health, and happiness beyond our wildest imaginations. How should we, as anthroposophists, face this challenge? Won't humanity want this? Steiner, I believe, could foresee the transhumanist movement. I do think that. And he offered this, and I'm quoting, everybody is obliged to undergo the battle. In its effects, it is experienced by everybody. There would be no greater fallacy than to say we must rebel against what technical science has brought to us in modern life. We must protect ourselves from Ahriman. We must withdraw from this modern life. He goes on to say, in a certain respect, such an attitude would be an indication of spiritual cowardice. The real remedy, Steiner, lies not in allowing the forces of the soul to weaken and to withdraw from modern life, but in so strengthening these forces that its pandemonium can be endured. World karma demands a courageous attitude to modern life, and that is why genuine spiritual science calls at the very outset for effort, really strenuous effort on the part of the human soul. Wow. When I read that, I was very deeply moved. And I'll say, this is the background to why we need to develop counterbalances for our technological age. And in other lectures, Steiner also says that we need to not run from this, not avoid it, not try to protect ourselves, rather to develop the counterbalances. This issue will not be forever. Steiner talks about a future collapse of this. Even the physical world, however, is also temporary, and our time living on it as physical beings is temporary. we need to find the way to endure what we are facing with enthusiasm. That includes Ahriman's incarnation and what comes with it. For me, knowing the role of Christ in evolution fills me with enthusiasm. Knowing that I can work with the Christ to transform fills me with enthusiasm. I feel it similar to the pep talk a coach might have given me right before my big event in sports. Let's now venture into these counterbalances for this technological age. We've heard its challenges. Let's look for counterbalances. And first and foremost, we've learned that we can bring the Christ into everything, every device, every machine, every nature elemental. And as I said, don't do this on humans unless you're trying to do a healing and you have their consent and they are willing participants in their healing. Through this, we Christianize the lifeless. In a way, this is what is meant by practicing spiritual science. But this is, it's a language that we're learning so that we can speak with spiritual beings. For example, the Vulcan beings, which I discuss in another talk, that are here amongst us as a counterbalance to the fall of the spirits of darkness. So we have these different voices in our subconsciousness. All this is actually exercising our ability to raise our consciousness into supernature. Steiner called for us in his last letter to the members to balance what we do in subnature with exercises and deeds in supernature. I think it's also very important to look at your movement, for we sit or stand in front of screens far too much. Walk every day is my suggestion at the same time in the sunlight for an hour or so. Do eurythmy, even if you're doing it online. Sing in a choir. Do gardening. Do something more than merely looking at nature, but get involved with it. And especially for children, I think doing sports or some form of outdoor play for 2 hours every day, even in the winter months, is very important for them as well as for us. So people might ask, why are there not more people today able to experience the spiritual world? Steiner answered this: it is an issue of nutrition. And many a biodynamic farmer knows and lives by this. Eat healthy, etheric, rich foods. And I also suggest fasting for a full day. So at dinner, one night, that's your last meal. You don't eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner the next day. You wait till the following day, breakfast. And of course, build up to that. And I think that's a very healthy thing and acts as a counterbalance. Lastly, this 20-20-20 rule, where if you're working hard at a screen, every 20 minutes, look out a window. Oh, I can look out this window here at nature that is at least 20 meters away and look for 20 seconds or so before returning to your screen. So now I'd like to talk about breathing supernature. Steiner called this refined breathing. He also called it the new yoga will. So if we ponder Jehovah breathed breath into man and he became a living soul, we think air was breathed into him. But when we look at this a little more, we realize, no, that couldn't have happened. We didn't have a physical body back then. So if we listen to Steiner's words from his esoteric lesson of June 5th, 1906, we can get a better handle on this. So I'll quote Steiner. But spirit lives in the air around us. When a man inhales, he breathes spirit in. When he exhales, he puts some of the spirit that lives in him into the exhaled air. The spirit develops in him even more and also outside in the world through the rhythmicized spirit-filled breath. The spiritual man's growth is promoted through breathing in and out. The most important thing is the spirit that a man puts into his exhaled breath. The spirit is built up by thoughts. A man builds up and streams out his spirit through every thought that he gives along with his exhalation. Man didn't always have an organ to inhale air. Beings breathed fire instead of air on Old Moon. Just as we breathe oxygen in and out, so they breathed fire in and out. Fire in and cold out. Future men will no longer breathe air, just as a man prepares his warmth by feeding his warmth organ, the heart, with blood circulation through air streaming in from outside, so he will later have an inner air organ through which his organism will be supplied with what he now takes in from the atmosphere. A man prepares his own warmth that on Old Moon had been directly sucked in from the environment. A man will be able to elaborate the used up air in his interior. Later on, he'll no longer live in an outer air. On Jupiter, he'll live in light and inhale light, just as we inhale air now and inhaled warmth on Old Moon. So we can see we breathed air today. We breathed in the past, before Atlantis, we breathed warmth. And so a dragon is a fire breathing, it's something from the past. And in the future, we will breathe light. And this is what he calls refined breathing. So I'm going to quote something else from Steiner because he talks about head and lung. And he talks about when an adult thinks, his force of thinking is contained only in the continuation of a breathing process. And so let me quote Steiner from Anthroposophical Spiritual Science and Medical Therapy. The lung formation is a metamorphosis of the head formation, only it is arrested at an earlier stage. The head advances further in regard to the same formative forces that are present in the lung, but the lung remains at an earlier stage. All functions of thinking, even the processing of perceptions, are nothing but breathing developed further in an upward direction. The head is an advanced respiratory organ, having moved beyond the lung stage, so it represses breathing, and instead of taking in air, it takes in etheric forces through the senses. All functions of thinking, even the processing of perceptions, are nothing but breathing developed further in an upward direction. The head is an advanced respiratory organ, having moved beyond the lung stage, but it represses breathing air, and instead of taking in air, takes in etheric forces through its senses, end quote. This is refined breathing, the breathing of the four ethers. So, our normal breathing is met by the plant kingdom. We exhale carbon dioxide. They, in a sense, inhale it and exhale oxygen, which we inhale. So something affects plants and us in a spiritual way, and this is the sun. And so how is this refined breathing, we could ask, met as a cycle? And just to finish the air breathing, you can see here some amazing relationships that you can discover about how our breathing reflects the cosmos. And, we take 18 breaths per minute. That's 1,080 in an hour. So in 24 hours, we take 25,920 breaths. Turns out that's exactly the same number, 25,920 years that it takes the sun to move through the entire zodiac. So this helps us understand we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. And in blue, I tried to show some other things that need further research, where you start with the ratio of nearly 4:1 of our breathing to our circulation. So in this slide, you can see where Kali Yuga began. A little bit after that, or in a sense, we can say they understood they needed to, but the full implementation of yoga begins soon after Kali Yuga had begun. In the middle of this, we had the mystery upon Golgotha. And then after that, a time when air became just air. In fact, we can even say that it's worse than that. What we breathe in through air is now something it's trying to cause anti-Michaelic beings. And then Kali Yuga comes to an end. We need to have a new yoga that helps us become conscious of the spiritual world, especially in the etheric. So I'd like to make this a little clearer. If we look at this picture, we can see a diagram of what Indian culture, ancient Indian culture, was like, the oneness of everything. And this would be represented by a circle. If we move to Persian times, it would be best to draw it with two centers, the heavenly and the earthly, Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, darkness and light, and so on. And so we would have to change the circle to an ellipse with two centers. In Egyptian, we now have those two centers, but the oval has pulled apart enough to look like a lemniscate with a center in the middle. And this is what yoga develops, this breathing into one another of the macrocosm and the microcosm. And we get to Greek times. Oh, and I should say these all are still within each other. So we still have the past with us today, but we're not conscious of it. And so we get to Greek and Roman times, or now I'm showing sort of Roman. In Greek, we also had this meeting point. But when we get into Roman times, these separate. And so we have the development of Roman laws. And finally, we are in our times showing this today when material has set in. Kali Yuga had reached its darkest time. But with the ending of Kali Yuga in 1879, the potential is now to work again with the etheric body, especially as the etheric body, as Steiner says, is loosening within the physical. It has become possible in our time to reconnect what was split, to make a new lemniscate, and this can be used for our ascent. So Steiner drew a diagram somewhat like this, where he pointed out how once Lucifer dominated in our thinking, Ahriman dominates in our as the challenge to our willing. And we are going to, in this ascent, need to develop a soul process that uses the light. And by light, he means everything that we take in through our senses, what we are breathing in through the senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. All of these he calls the light ether. And this, I'll just point out as an aside, has become a problem because people have heard about, and it's a mistranslation of a sound ether. No, it's a tone ether, and it's probably better to call it the chemical or the number ether, so this doesn't happen. What we hear is light ether. Sympathy as a force corresponds to inhalation. Antipathy corresponds to exhalation of the astral body, of course. The astral controls our inhalation, while our etheric body is present in our exhalation. You can see that by the fact that our exhalation is full of vapor. But Steiner also points out how today a person who's clairvoyant can see the morality in one's breath. And this will become true for all of us eventually, that we will be able to see the morality. So when we inhale all four of the ethers. The warmth ether carries the others to the light ether to our thinking, the chemical tone ether to our feeling, and the life ether to our metabolic system for our willing. So this question, how is this cycle completed? We exhale what? If we are inhaling these ethers, what are we exhaling? We can turn to the first class lessons, the first class lessons 6, 10, and 17 to get the answers. Here we learn that our dead thoughts are exhaled, and these dead thoughts are inhaled by the third hierarchy, namely the angels, archangels, and archai. And they render these dead thoughts into living thoughts that they then exhale, which is then inhaled by the second hierarchy, who in turn exhale the rays of the sun and stars. These are rays that are full of the light of cosmic thought, permeated with love. The reality in which we live has been so transformed that the air we breathe is something different from what it was 4 and 5 millennia ago. So I'm quoting Steiner now. And with this change, so has the consciousness of mankind also changed. Dead air and dead thinking. Once there was soul in the atmosphere of the earth. The air was the soul. This it is no longer. Steiner goes on to say, we could call it soul in a different way. The spiritual beings of elemental nature can be called anti-Michaelic, these that penetrate into you when you practice yoga breathing today. Steiner went on to say the anti-Michaelic beings are able to penetrate into the air and through the air into the human being. And in this way, they enter into mankind. So just think of Wi-Fi, and we are putting these anti-Michaelic demonic beings into the air, and we breathe these in. And that's not to make you afraid. It's not to cause you to say, I want to be in a Wi-Fi free room. We must and can only strive for that which is right for today if we become conscious of a much more subtle relation that we have to the external world, so that in regard to our ether body, something takes place which must enter our consciousness more and more. And this something is similar or analogous to our breathing process. And that is this refined breathing. The essential point is that through a special kind of moral and spiritual culture needed to be developed, the ordinary interweaving of the physical, etheric, astral, and ego will be and must be changed. Those directions which are given for the training of the moral feelings, as also those for concentration in thinking and for meditation, anthroposophical meditation, all this makes finally for one goal: the loosening of the spiritual texture which binds together the physical and etheric bodies, so that the etheric body does not remain firmly fitted in the physical body as it once naturally was. All the exercises strive at this lifting out, this loosening of the etheric body. Thereby, another union between the astral and the etheric is brought about. This is an important part of our evolution at this point, that the astral and the etheric can create a new union. That's from the lecture cycle From Jesus to Christ, lecture 2. So I'm at the end now. Let's just review the main points that we've heard. Humanity has descended deeply, more deeply into the physical than was originally planned. And now, in order to ascend, we need to loosen the etheric body. But this loosening of the etheric body will cause the physical body to wither. And this withering of the physical body will cause human beings to want transhumanism. In order to ascend, we need to loosen the etheric. In time, we will discard the physical body. And Steiner actually gives the date of 5700 when birthing will no longer be possible. And he says, we will then need to rely upon the fallen spirits of darkness to keep our presence on the physical going. But at this time, many members of humanity will be able to leave and discard their physical bodies. But to get to that point, we have to learn that how to breathe the ethers. We have to learn how to be present in the etheric. As Christ is showing us the way today, so we must also ascend to where the Christ is. As yoga of the air developed when man deeply entered the physical, so must a yoga of the ethers be developed as we consciously enter the etheric. And our exhalations contain our moral character. And this will be the substance used to build the bodies of those on the future human stage of Jupiter. So it's already begun. We have become already creative spiritual beings, albeit unconsciously. Our task going forward is to become conscious of our creative willing. And for this, we need this refined breathing. So if you want to find more, there is a Mystech study guidebook. You don't have to be part of a study group. And you can buy this on Amazon. It's also available from the Rudolf Steiner Bookstore of Seattle. But for you in Australia, it's much better to buy it from Amazon because the shipping costs will be way much more expensive than the book itself. So I leave you with 3 questions. Why is refined breathing so unknown within anthroposophy? As angels permeated earth with wisdom from the Curiosities, what beings will we assist to build a Jupiter permeated by love? And lastly, what are the ramifications of Christ in the etheric in regards to refined breathing? So I'll take your questions now. And I need.
I'm just unmuting myself and you've gone back on big screen. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Sure.
That's a mammoth overview and a very detailed insight. Thank you very much at that time of the morning. Not many of us could do that at 6 a.m. Or at 8 p.m. Yeah. So those are very far-reaching questions you left us with. I'm just going to ask people here, if people on the Zoom have a question, maybe they could type it into the chat. I'm going to put that on the sidebar if I can, just to see if anyone types a message. Otherwise, we can open it to the floor here. And what we will do is ask a question. Andrew might not be able to hear you, but I'll repeat the question. Can you see everybody, Andrew?
I can see it looks like 2, 4, 6 people, including you, Martin.
Oh, good. Okay, we can't see ourselves. There's a few more. The camera's not got a big scope. So there's a few more than the 6 of us you can see. And some people don't want to be on camera, but I'm just going to leave you on the big screen so we don't have to watch ourselves. So Vika has a question. Vika's just here.
Should I just...
Yeah, just reach over.
Hi, Andrew. Can you
Hi.
hear me? Hello.
Yes, I hear you fine. Thank you.
I really resonate with what you said at the beginning about your Rosicrucian impulse of being where the people are, that's as a task. And so right at the end, when you gave the summary and you were sort of saying, overall, we're trying to loosen the etheric from the physical, which I understand. Would you also then say, if it's likely that there'll be human beings who don't do that or don't have that happening very well in time, that we'd want to be working to loosen the etheric from the physical, but also know how to come back in to be with the others, not a loosening out in a sort of luciferic way, as in off to the glorious future, you know. Is that something you think about? Like, could you speak to that at all? So we don't want to kind of advance so that we also can't work back in with people who are still not there. Or some would want to.
Excellent question.
Yeah.
It's a very good question. And what I would say is that there is a great danger on 2 sides. So in one, if you say, I'm going to loosen and I'm going to discard my physical, I'm going to go live up in the etheric, in a way, you are making yourself a candidate to be easily grabbed by Lucifer and taken away to the Luciferic realm. And so you will have no desire to be Rosicrucian-like and take what you have gained and bring it to those who are in need of it.
Yeah.
Because you'll go, oh, it's so wonderful here. I feel so good here in the etheric. I'm so happy I don't have to deal with those horrible earthly things anymore, and all those machines and blah blah blah. So yes, and so the Rosicrucian gesture isn't to become etherically conscious if you lose the values of the earth, if you lose that sense of why earth is important, or if you lose that sense of brotherhood with all of humanity, and that they are a part of this future body of the human being. And you want to try to, out of your love for all of humanity, to help all of them achieve this loosening and coming up. As you know, Steiner said, humanity as a whole is crossing the threshold. This loosening is happening for all humanity. But our consciousness is staying materialistic. It is the great task of our times to overcome the materialism in the way we view reality. And so we need to do that. And as we go ahead into these coming years, as we have the incarnation of Ahriman is going to give us spiritual experiences, but they will be individual spiritual experiences. And I'm well aware of companies that are working on what you might say metaverse spirituality.
Yeah. Annette, you had a question? Do you want to come and speak it here, or? I'm just getting Annette to come to the microphone.
You spoke about, again, you think it's hard to understand at 6 a.m. It's also hard to follow it at 8 p.m. after a long day. So on the one hand, I've got this picture that you brought about us through the meditative exercises, our etheric loosening from the physical, so we become less connected with it. And at the same time, we are currently working as a humanity on having robots that are physical more than anything else. Did I understand it correctly that at the end you said that as we move away, therefore, in the Jupiter age from our physical, we would be using these robots?
Well, I didn't yet, but
work with
yeah.
that? Or I'm just trying to understand the connection between us moving away from the physical, the robots being left behind. Are we just guiding them from a distance? Like one of your questions was about that, like who are these beings? And I was thinking, oh, animals, oh no, robots, oh no, animals, oh no, I don't know which one it is. So I was hoping you could say a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Annette. And as the a downside of the loosening of the etheric is that the physical will wither, according to Steiner. And this withering will be most prominent in the limbs. And I think today we can already see this happening, where in our trunk, people are expanding into obesity, but in their limbs, in relatively speaking, their limbs are becoming more like a pretzel, as we call it here, pretzel stick. And I think this is going to progress to the point where people in the future are going to say, why don't I just replace my limbs with a prosthetic limb? I see these people who have had an amputation because they lost their arm, and they're much more functional than I am. They're stronger than I am. Why do I carry around these weak arms where the bones are breaking all the time and so on? And 4 hours a day working out in the gym doesn't seem to do much for me. I'm just as people today have hearing aids, pacemakers, breast augmentation, and we don't think anything of it anymore. We'll reach a time when people won't think of it anymore about replacing a withered limb for a much more attractive prosthetic limb. And I suspect that children will grow up expecting to change out their natural limbs with prosthetic limbs sometime when they're teenagers, when their growth spurt is over. And I don't know if you know this, but Steiner talked about how the mutual relationship between the soul and the body, it used to be mutually beneficial right up until old age when a person died. But this has been descending. In Christ's time, it was age 33. Today, it's age 27, when what the body can offer the soul comes to an end. It can't offer anything more, and the soul has to do its development out of our own will afterwards. And the body also out of our own will. And this has been descending. When it reaches the age of 14, puberty will no longer happen. And this is around the year 5700. It'll have gone that far that birthing will have come to an end. And so many of us at that point will not have finished what we need to do on earth. We will not have completed our karmic debts. And so we will need to come to earth. And Steiner talks about this era, this seventh post-Atlantean cultural age, when we will descend into bodies that no longer experience birth or death. And these bodies will do evil in the world, even though a good soul is within them. I liken this to when I get in an automobile and get out of an automobile. I get into it, I drive somewhere. I'm doing evil when I'm in that car. I'm polluting the air. And as I'm driving, I'm running over insects and maybe toads and frogs in the road. And I've had the occurrence, and I felt horrible when it happened, when at night and a possum ran out and I ran over the possum. The cars are doing evil, even though the driver inside might be a good soul. In the future, bodies will be like that. And these will be bodies that have been rendered in part by these fallen spirits of darkness. I'm not sure if I answered all of your question. I think I've forgotten, Annette, if there was more to your question. I think I know one thing I wanted to say too, which is this ascension, this time of ascending. Steiner points out that this Ahrimanic double that we have, we needed this double in order to come as deeply into the physical as we did. The Ahrimanic double is responsible for much of our sensory perception. You know that our head and our senses is our death pole. And we get that from Ahriman. And the Ahrimanic double has helped form how we use electricity and magnetism in our sensory pole. And this is necessary for us to be present and develop what we need to here in the earthly. And so the agreement, so to speak, between these higher beings and the Ahrimanic beings was that they would get these physical bodies eventually. They are working towards making these physical bodies into what they want. And when we are able to leave these bodies behind, they will take over. They will inherit these bodies. So I
Yeah,
know
thank
that
you for
sounds
that clarification. Is there any other? Annette says, thank you, that's clarified it a lot. Is there anyone else who has a question?
Yes,
Anyone else?
But if you want to ask.
No, you, Ron?
Okay, so hello, Andrew. Don't know whether you can see me. My name is Ron. Hi.
Hi, Ron.
So one question, I have a couple, but firstly, the beings who are the future human beings who are now already entering into existence, and in some sense, I think Steiner referred to them as beginning to cause us a great deal of difficulty, as we cause the angels a great deal of difficulty towards the end of the moon period. But he didn't specify in that particular lecture what source they come from. What's their genesis? Who are these beings? So that's a question for me. You could give a perspective on that. And my second question, if possibly answer them together, is regarding the timings of things, because while you speak of all these things which necessarily come, and it makes perfect sense to me, and I've read it all myself, but my question often is about the Ahrimanic beings and the Azuri beings who are also with us now, bringing developments in a distorted form and trying to bring them earlier than is timely, and hence causing more difficulty thereby, and a lot of reaction that I see in many people against transhumanism, etc., which often I think is in fact anti-humanism or subhumanism, is because people have an instinctive feeling that these things are coming, in an illegitimate form, if you like, too soon and distorted and harmful, before we're ready for them in a way, or before it's necessary. Is that clear? The question's clear?
I'm not sure I think if I hear you correctly, and this microphone you're using was one that I had difficulty with, but I can talk about these future beings as you wanted to know about. And I think the second question is it possible that these anti-human beings or transhumanism is more than we can handle? Is that kind of a way to word it?
Yeah, I think it's being brought. Sorry, I'll come a bit closer. It seems like it's being brought in a great rush now, in distorted form and sort of before is timely, in a way, such that we,
right.
Yeah, and I think there are healthy elements to it, as you point out, but I think there at the moment the forces bringing it in under great compulsion upon us are bringing it in, as I said, distorted and too early.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is, I think, where a great majority of anthroposophists who learn about things, and I think I feel the same way that you are saying it, and I think humanity on a just subconscious level and maybe into their consciousness would agree with you, even without spiritual science. This is too much. It's too fast. And it's interesting, Steiner does say in his time that the pace of evolution was 10 times faster than it was at the beginning of the 15th century. 10 times faster already. And he said it's going to increase. And then he kind of alluded to the fact that this is necessary. Perhaps you know this verse that I think von Ementhoven is the actual author, but it's often attributed to Steiner. It's not Steiner. It's a versification from a couple of Steiner lectures that begins, we must eradicate all fear of the future, and it goes on about being confident that the spiritual world isn't going to give us more than we can handle. And I think that is the case. I think the problem is that we feel abandoned by the spiritual world. We feel that the spiritual world is giving us and has told us, you're on your own now, kid. We've been kicked out of the house. We're told to go make a living. And it feels like life is too much for us. So these beings are acting today in a way that is preparing, I would say, for Ahriman's incarnation. And I'm going to tell you, and you won't like it, but that whatever you're experiencing now, if we go out 2, 3 more generations, so, you know, well after 2050 and the so-called singularity, it's going to be as much changed as what it was for my grandparents to go from horse and buggy to flying into outer space. You know, it's going to be amazingly changed in the next 2 generations. And then I think the pace will slow down, but I think it's going to accelerate dramatically. And so one has to find, how can I maintain my humanity? How can I do that for my children? How can I do that for my peers and loved ones in the world? And this is a really great issue of our times. It is the issue of our times. And you might think it's silly, but this developing of refined breathing, this working with the Christ, bringing Christ where 2 or more are gathered into that midst, is important. Bringing Christ right into, you know, these devices. Doing transformation in our time is necessary. Now, those future beings, the so-called Jupiter humans, if you read what Steiner had to say about us, and he says this in some of his lectures on Michael, that at one point we were sort of a group of spiritual beings in a kind of corner of the cosmos. And most of the spiritual beings didn't pay us any attention. It was Michael who gave us his attention. And I would say there's another corner somewhere where these beings who will be on the human stage of Jupiter have been. And they've been in this corner during the first half of earthly evolution. And they have their being who, like Michael, will be their champion on Jupiter. I don't know if that answers your question, but as you pointed out, during Old Moon in the second half, we were a nuisance to the angels. And angels that did not make it through to completion, to being angels, those same angels that Michael had to drive down in 1879 are angels that we prevented from reaching their angelhood. So in the Lord's Prayer, where it says, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors," brings new meaning to that. That from Old Moon, we have great debts to spiritual beings that some people call retarded or laggard, you know, and we have to realize we had a role in them not completing their work on the human stage of Old Moon, just as many humans will not complete their work because of these beings.
Thank you, Andrew. We've kind of reached 9:30.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually just ask everyone to live with their questions. And thank you on behalf of everyone here in Sydney for your contribution and your thoughts that are very provoking and far-reaching. Thank you so much.
And so generous to provide a lecture. for
Yeah,
us.
thank you for the preparation that you've done to provide
Not
us
at
with
all.
this lecture.
Tremendously dense content.
Yeah.
Really solid.
Julian saying tremendously dense and solid lecture.
In a good way.
In a good way, in a good way.
Well, I will say it's wonderful to see some of the faces here of people I've only known from social media, from Facebook and so on. John and, and some of you others, hello. So, and Annette, it was good to see you again, and Martin, to experience you in a more real way, even though it's still through Zoom.
Yeah.
Thank
Good.
you all.
Okay, I'm going to turn that recording off, and then we can say good night and good morning.